everyone, it's Tech here. Before we continue with the episode, I want to give a quick reminder that if you are interested to see more case files in VR chat, make sure to hit that subscribe button right down below. And be sure to turn that notification bell so you can get notified whenever Hayden upload a new video. Thank you so much. Enjoy the episode. Where's my friend Hanako at? Hanako!
What is a story? Is it something we tell just for fun? To scare each other around the campfire? Or is it something more? Can a story breathe? It can take step out of the pages of a book or the pixels on a screen and into our world. Can it plant an idea so powerful, so terrifying that it becomes real? Most of the time, the answer is no. But on May 31st, 2014, in the quiet suburban town of Waukesha, Wisconsin, the line between fiction and a horror violent reality didn't just blur, it was torn to pieces. This is the case that true crime fans know, but few truly understand the depth of it. It is not a typical story about a predator. It is about a story of belief and the dark corners of the internet, and how a modern-day boogeyman named Slender Man convinced two 12-year-old girls to nearly kill their best friend. This is Criminal Files, where we dive deep into the most infamous crimes, conspiracies, and criminal mysteries in history. I'm your host, Jalitza, the Spirit Cat, and today we're diving into the case that asks the terrifying question: what happens when online horror becomes an offline nightmare? To understand this crime, you have to understand the monster at the center of it. And Slenderman is a fascinating and uniquely 21st century creation. He wasn't born from ancient folklore or centuries-old legends. Slenderman was created on June 10th, 2009, in a thread on the website Something Awful. The forum was holding a Photoshop contest to create paranormal images. A user named Eric Knudsen, under the alias Victor Surge, posted two black and white photos of groups of children. He edited in a tall, impossibly thin figure in a black suit, with elongated arms and a blank, featureless face. The captions mentioned this figure abducting children. The internet, as it does, ran with it. The simple, creepy image sparked a wildfire of collaborative storytelling. People started writing creepypastas, horror stories, copied and pasted across forums. They created YouTube series like Marble Hornets and Everyman Hybrid, which presented Slenderman in a found footage, pseudo-documentary style. He became a meme, a myth, a digital legend. He stalked children in the woods. He caused memory loss, nosebleeds, and paranoia in his victims, and he could extend his tentacle-like arms from his back. He was, for most people, a brilliantly effective piece of internet horror, a campfire story for the digital age. But for a specific demographic, impressionable, curious kids exploring the darker side of the web, he was something else entirely. He felt real. And that brings us to today's three subjects: Morgan Geyser, Anissa Weir, both aged 12, and their friend, Peyton Leutner. By all accounts, these were normal middle schoolers. They were smart, creative, and obsessed with things that a lot of kids their age were in 2014. Adventure Time, YouTube, and like millions of others, they were fascinated by creepypastas and the world of online horror. They'd have sleepovers, watch scary videos, and try to scare each other. It was normal, if not a slightly macabre hobby. But for Morgan and Anissa, the fascination went deeper. They didn't just watch the videos, they immersed themselves in the lore. they began to truly believe in Slenderman. They started reading forums, the wikis, the sprawling, the confusion hundreds of anonymous users had built. And in that canon, they had found a directive to become a proxy of Slenderman, a servant who does his bidding. You had to prove your loyalty, and that usually involved violence. The girls later told police they believed Slenderman was real. They believed he lived in a mansion in the Nicollet National Forest in Wisconsin. They believed he could read their thoughts, and that he could be anywhere and everywhere. And, most chilling, they believed that he had threatened them and their families. They thought if they didn't prove themselves to him, he would kill everyone they loved. This belief system, this paranoid fantasy built on a foundation of internet fiction, began to calcify into a plan. They decided they had to kill someone. They chose their friend, Peyton. In the days leading to the attack, they made plans. They wrote notes. One note, found later, read, "Plan. Go to the forest. Kill Peyton. Go to Slenderman. Become proxy." They discussed the best way to do it. Stabbing was the chosen method. They even had a specific date, May 31st, the anniversary of the original Slenderman post. This was their sacred mission. On the day of the attack, it was like any other Saturday. 3 girls had a sleepover at Morgan's house. In the morning, they told Morgan's parents that they were going to go play hide and seek in a nearby park. Instead, they walked to a public restroom in a park. There, according to the criminal complaint, Anissa told Morgan, "Go ballistic, go crazy." Morgan, without a word, began stabbing Peyton 19 times with a 5-inch kitchen knife she had brought from home. The attack was brutal and frenzied. Peyton was stabbed in the arms, legs, and torso. One stab wound pierced her liver and missed a major artery by less than a millimeter. It was a miracle she survived. After the stabbing, Morgan and Anissa simply left her there in the woods, bleeding out, believing she was dead. They started walking. Their goal? To trek the 1,000 acres of the woodland to find the Slenderman's mansion. Meanwhile, Peyton, in an incredible act of survival, managed to crawl out of the wooded area onto a bike path. A cyclist found her, bleeding profusely, and called 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's a young girl. She's covered in blood. She's been stabbed. She's saying her friends did it? Peyton was rushed to the hospital. She underwent emergency surgery and, against all odds, survived. Police now had a stabbing victim with 2 missing 12-year-old suspects. They immediately went to Morgan's house, where her parents were baffled, thinking the girls were just at the park. The gravity of the situation set in quickly. This wasn't a simple case of a fight gone wrong. This was an attempted murder. While police were scrambling, Morgan and Anissa were on their bizarre pilgrimage. They were picked up by a concerned motorist on the highway about 5 miles from their crime scene. The driver asked the parents where they were. The answer? They were runners that were trying to get to the Nicollet National Forest to see a figure that no one knew existed. The driver, Riley, creeped out, called the police. When officers arrived, the girls were calm. They were detained without incident. It was during their initial interviews that they truly saw the nature of the crime begin to unfold. They talked openly about Slenderman. They said they had to do it to protect their families, and they showed no remorse. To them, it wasn't murder. It was a necessity, a transaction with a supernatural being to ensure their own safety. The public and the media were stunned. How could 2 seemingly normal preteen girls commit such a brutal act of fictional character? The legal system now had a monumental task to figure out not just what they did, but why they did it, and what to do with them. This case would become a landmark, pushing the boundaries of legal definitions of mental illness, criminal intent, and childhood fantasy. And all starts with our first theory. Theory 1. The Believers. This is the most straightforward, and in many ways, the most terrifying theory. It's the one the prosecutors leaned into, especially for Morgan Geyser. The idea that Morgan and Anissa were true believers. They weren't just kids playing a game that went too far. They had descended into shared psychologic delusion and built entirely around an internet myth. What we're looking at here is a profound break from reality. They were children at a critical stage of cognitive development. Their brains are still learning to distinguish fantasy from reality. When you immerse a deep mind in a consistent, detailed, and threatening narrative, especially one presented with a realistic found footage style, the boundaries can completely dissolve. For them, Slenderman wasn't a story. He was a tangible threat. The fear was real. The imperative to act, in their minds, was a matter of life and death. The evidence for this is compelling. Their online search histories were flooded with Slenderman content. They had notebooks filled with drawings and stories about him. In interviews, they spoke of him with a chilling matter of factness. Morgan in particular showed signs of this long before the attack. She had a history of hallucinations and delusions. She reported seeing ghosts, seeing Slenderman in her dreams, and even claimed seeing unicorns. Her reality was already more porous than most. Anissa, while perhaps less intrinsically prone to psychosis, was a follower, drawn to Morgan's powerful belief system. The plan itself, to walk hundreds of miles to a fictional mansion, shows a complete detachment from reality. This theory posits that they were not evil, that they were gravely, tragically ill. They were victims of their own impressionable minds and the unfiltered access to a dark, persuasive mythology that they were too young to process. But is that the whole story? Was it just a shared delusion? Or were there other more mundane factors at play? Which brings us to the second theory. Theory 2. The dark side of the fandom. This theory doesn't dismiss the belief, but it contextualizes it with a larger social framework. It argues that belief in Slenderman was less about the clinical psychotic break and more about the intense, all-consuming nature of online fandom and the desperate desire to belong. Think about it. In 2014, the creepypasta community was a huge sprawling thing for Tumblr, Reddit, and YouTube. For lonely kids, becoming an expert in this lore was a way to gain social capital. It was its own secret club, with its own rules, its own language, its own hierarchy. The more you know, the more in you were. The more extreme your belief, the more dedicated a fan you were. The Slenderman mythos was, and is, a participatory culture. You don't just consume it, you add to it. You create fan art, you write your own stories, you roleplay as characters. For some, the logical endpoint of that participation is to live the story, to make the narrative real. It becomes a performative of identity. I am not just a fan, I am part of the myth itself. This is an incredibly potent draw for adolescents who are already trying on different identities and seeking a place to belong. In this reading, Morgan and Anissa weren't just believing in Slenderman, they were performing their fandom. The planning, the notes, the secret mission, it was all a part of the dark roleplay game that spilled out over the digital world and now into the physical one. The act of violence was the ultimate proof of their dedication, the thing that would cement their status not just as fans, but as legendary figures within the mythos. This theory suggests a blurred line between the genuine belief and the desire to be part of something bigger than themselves. It wasn't necessarily that they had fully believed a tall man in a suit would hurt their families, but that committing to the narrative, to the idea of it, was more important than reality itself. The social dynamics of their friendship, the leader, Morgan, the follower, Anissa, fueled this performance, each pushing the other further into the extreme. But wait, if this was a performance, a dark game, does that make them more or less culpable? If you know you're playing a game, but you decide to make it real, where does that leave us? This leads us to the most controversial and legally complex theory. Theory 3, the knowing actors. This was essentially the argument that the state tried to make, particularly against Anissa Weir. This theory posts that the girls may have been fascinated by Slenderman. They knew the difference between right and wrong. They knew that scabbing their friend was a criminal act, and they choose to do it anyway. The Slenderman story was not a delusion that drove them to do it, but an excuse, a framework they used to justify a pre-existing desire to hurt somebody. This is a difficult theory to swallow, given their age and the bizarre nature of the crime. But prosecutors pointed out evidence of planning and foresight. They brought the knife from home. They picked a specific date. They lied to Morgan's parents about where they were going. They chose a secluded spot. And after the stabbing, they knew to flee. This all suggests a level of cognitive awareness of the wrongfulness of their actions. They may have wanted to believe in Slenderman. They may have found the story thrilling. But at the moment of the attack, they knew Peyton was a real girl. The knife was a real knife, and their actions would have real and deadly consequences. The legal system hinges on the concept of a guilty mind. For a defendant to be found guilty, the state must prove they intended to commit the crime. The defense of not guilty by reason of insanity is an incredibly high bar to clear. You have to prove that, due to severe mental illness, disease, or defect, the defendant was not able to understand the wrongfulness of their actions. The prosecution's job was to argue that despite their strange beliefs, they understood that stabbing someone was wrong. The planning and the attempt to hide evidence were key to that argument. This theory is the coldest one. It removes the supernatural element and presents us with a chilling fact. 2 children attempted to murder another child. The why becomes almost secondary. The focus is on what. It forces us to confront the possibility of pure, unexplained evil residing in the hearts of 12-year-olds. It's an uncomfortable thought, which is why the other theories, involving mental illness and femme culture, are often more palatable. But the legal system had to consider it. So, we have 3 frameworks. The believers, a psychotic break. The fandom, a performative social act. And the knowing actors, a conscious choice. The truth, as it is, almost always is a likely complex and horrifying cocktail of all 3. But the court had to untangle it. The fate of the 2 girls depended on it. And their paths through the legal system would be just as strange and unprecedented as the crime itself. Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weir were initially charged as adults attempting first-degree and intentional homicide. This decision sent shockwaves through the community. Charging 12-year-olds as adult for a Slenderman stabbing? It just seemed like a surreal overreach to many. But the Wisconsin laws allowed it for serious crimes, and the prosecutors argued the severity of the crime warranted it. However, the defense quickly mounted a challenge, arguing that the girls were not competent to stand trial, that they couldn't understand the proceedings or assist in their own defense due to severe mental illness. Began years of psychological evaluations, hearings, and legal maneuvering. The cases were eventually separated, and both would ultimately hinge on the results of those mental evaluations. Let's start with Anissa Weir. In 2017, Anissa's case went to trial, but it wasn't a typical trial. She pleaded guilty to attempted second-degree homicide, but her lawyers argued she was not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, the insanity defense. So the trial became what it's known for as a phase trial. The first phase determined if she committed the crime. She had. She pled guilty. The second phase would determine her mental state at the time. The prosecution argued the knowing actors theory. They said she knew it was wrong. They pointed to her asking Morgan to go crazy as evidence. She was egging her on, aware of the reality of the situation. The defense argued the believer theory. They presented evidence of her delusional belief system. A key witness was Dr. Kenneth Robbins, a psychiatrist who testified that Anissa was suffering from a shared psychotic disorder, and that she truly believed that Slenderman was real and would kill her family if she didn't obey. He said she believed that Peyton's death wasn't a murder, but a sacrifice, and would allow Peyton to become a ghost and serve Slenderman too. In her distorted reality, she was doing Peyton a favor. The jury had one question. Did Anissa Weir, as a result of mental disease, lack the capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of her conduct? After a day of deliberation, the jury said yes. She was found not guilty by reason of insanity. The judge then committed her to a secure mental illness institution for a minimum of 3 years. She would be released only when doctors and a judge determined she was no longer a danger to herself or to others. Now let's turn to Morgan Geyser. Morgan's case was even more complex. Her mental health issues were more severe and more clearly documented. She was diagnosed with early-onset schizophrenia. She experienced auditory and visual hallucinations, disorganized thinking, and profound delusions. Her evaluation reports were heartbreaking. She believed she could time travel, that she had mind powers, and that she regularly communed with Slender Man and other fictional characters from Harry Potter and the Doctor Who universes, whom she believed were real. She believed Slender Man had cameras everywhere and could hear her thoughts. In 2017, rather than go to trial, Morgan pleaded guilty to attempted first-degree intentional homicide. But like Anissa, her plea was part of an insanity defense. The court had to determine her mental state. The evidence was overwhelming. Psychiatrist after psychiatrist testified that Morgan was deeply, profoundly ill. She lived in a world where fantasy and reality were indistinguishable. One doctor stated at the time, she lacked substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of her actions. She wasn't just a believer. She was living in a completely different reality. In 2018, a judge agreed. Morgan Geyser was also found not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to a mental health facility for a minimum of 10 years, a longer sentence reflecting the court's view that she was the primary actor in the stabbing, and that her illness was more severe. So the legal system had spoken. The official verdict was that both girls were legally insane at the time. The believer theory had won in court. But the story doesn't end with a verdict. The aftermath of this case is a long, complicated, ongoing journey of recovery, guilt, and a lifelong struggle with the monster that helped bring to life. Peyton, the victim, survived her horrific injuries. Physically, she recovered remarkably well, but the psychological scars are undoubtedly deep. She has, for the most part, stayed out of the public eye, a testament to her family's desire to let her have a normal life after such an abnormal trauma. Anissa Weir was released from the Mental Health Institute in September 2021 after 7 years of treatment. She was 19 years old. Her release came with strict conditions, including continued mental health monitoring and no access to the internet without approval. In a rare interview after her release, she expressed remorse, calling her actions inexcusable and stating, "I know I did something horrible. I know there's no taking it back." She's trying to build a life forever shadowed by the actions of her 12-year-old self. Morgan Geyser remains in a mental institution facility. In 2022 hearing, she spoke to the court via video, now a young woman. She apologized to Peyton, saying, "I never meant for any of this to happen. I know that I did something terrible. I know I hurt somebody really badly." Doctors testified that she made significant progress with medication and therapy, gaining insight to her illness, but that she still requires structured care. Her schizophrenia is a life sentence in itself, a constant battle with a monster that lives inside her head, far more real than Slenderman ever was. So where does that leave us? We're left with a tangle of web and blame. Do we blame the girls? Their parents for not monitoring their internet use? The creators of Slenderman? The internet itself? Eric, the man who photoshopped the original image, has expressed profound sorrow and horror over the event. But can he be blamed? He created a piece of art, a meme. He didn't tell anyone to commit violence. The internet is a vast, chaotic ecosystem of ideas. It's a tool. It can be used for incredible good and unimaginable horror. It's a mirror reflecting our collective conscious, and sometimes we see monsters staring back. The Slenderman stabbing is a Rorschach test. What you see in it depends on your own fears. Do you fear the unmonitored access children have to the dark corners of their web? Then you see a failure of parenting and a content moderation. Do you fear the power of belief and the fragility of the human mind? Then you see a tragic case of mental illness. Do you fear the incoherent darkness that may exist in anyone, regardless of age? Then you see a pure, inexplicable evil. Perhaps the most terrifying theory of all is that there is no single answer, that it was a perfect storm, a vulnerable mind prone to psychosis, a persuasive and detailed online mythology, and a powerful social dynamic between two friends, and the impulsive, dramatic nature of adolescence. All these factors collided with a catastrophic result. The story of Slenderman is a story, but the story of Morgan, Anissa, and Peyton is a human one. It's a story about how the fictions we tell can have real consequences. It's a warning about the stories we consume and the stories we believe. It reminds us that the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones lurking in the woods. They're the ones that we create, and the ones sometimes we allow ourselves to become. What do you think? Were they believers, lost in a fandom, or knowing actors? Let us know in the comments. And remember, some stories are best left as fiction. Thanks for watching Criminal Files.
What criminal case do you want to see next? Comment below. It's Hanako here again. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. If you have any questions or suggestions, let me know in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you, and feel free to share this video with anyone who might enjoy it too. Thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next video.